Last week's video looked at the rise and fall of heavy industry in Pittsburgh. In only a few decades' time, the city went from a raw materials processing powerhouse to one whose economy was centered around education, medicine, and technology. This meant that there was thousands of buildings over the years that became obsolete in fairly short order. Now, unfortunately, some of these buildings were demolished, but despite some of these heinous decisions to demolish, some developers have chosen to go a different route. This involves adaptive reuse, incorporating buildings of Pittsburgh's past and transforming them in a way that'll make them part of Pittsburgh's future. With that in mind, here are some of the coolest adaptive reuse projects in the city. The Condo building, now known as Angel's Arms, was once St. Michael the Archangel Church. Situated on the south side slopes, this building was a church for 130 years before it finally closed down in 1992. 10 years later, a developer took a big chance, renovating the church and rectory into high-end condos. Given the quirks of the existing building and the dramatic transformation that took place, no two condos are exactly alike, and one in particular stands out as the most impressive of them all. I was lucky enough to get a tour of that condo unit and realized quickly that it wasn't just any old condo. The main section of the condo was impressive enough with its open concept, soaring ceilings, balconies, and built-in fish tank. But the real attraction of this one is that it goes several stories up into the bell tower. After climbing a couple sets of stairs that felt more like ladders than stairs, I made it to the top of the bell tower, which had one of the best and most unique views in the city. Because the church is perched on the side of a steep hill and you're 6 stories up above that, you have a completely unobstructed view to all of downtown Pittsburgh. And best of all, this one's actually for sale. So if you have $1.3 million burning a hole in your pocket, maybe this one's for you. Of all the buildings on this list, Mill 19 might be the newest building to get adaptively reused. The original building was only built back in the mid-1950s, but mill operations ended in 1997, and like many of the mills just outside of Pittsburgh, its future was bleak. But unlike many of the mills just outside of Pittsburgh, this one was actually salvaged, sort of. Embracing the concept of building a new building inside of an old historic frame, the development team set to work on a 250,000 square foot complex. The goal was to create a center focused on technology, precision manufacturing, and robotics. It also has one of the largest roof-mounted solar arrays in the country. There's been some conflicting opinions about the building inside a building concept. Some people appreciate the nod to the past that it provides, but others have suggested that it just adds unnecessary cost and complexity to a project without really incorporating much of the actual history into the new building. There's actually an increasing number of projects like this across the country, including the most famous one, the Domino's factory in Brooklyn. Personally, I like it, and I agree with the people who think it's a cool nod to the past, but it also doesn't let the old building interfere too much in the functionality of the new project. But I also think brutalist architecture is cool, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. The next project on this list is cool because it maintained a significant part of a massive early 1900s industrial complex. The Heinz Lofts were originally built around 100 years ago and served a critical role as the Heinz company grew into the food giant that we all know today. The complex is mostly red brick buildings done in the Romanesque Revival style. In 2004, a $70 million project was undertaken to restore and renovate 5 of the old buildings in the complex. 267 apartments were constructed, but from the outside, the community still maintains much of its old architectural flair. The project helped spur along other redevelopment projects in Pittsburgh's North Shore. The Assembly is one of the most complex adaptive reuse projects that the city's seen in recent years, and it's one that really exemplifies the shift in the Pittsburgh economy. Originally opened as a manufacturing facility for the Ford Motor Company in 1915, the building was recently converted into a biomedical research hub following a $350 million transformation. At its peak, when it was a manufacturing facility, a new Model T was rolling off the assembly line every 90 seconds. The Great Depression hit the factory hard, but it would remain Ford-owned until the mid-1950s. From there, over the next 50 years, it was used for a variety of light industrial and commercial uses. Then, in 2006, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center purchased it with an eye towards future expansion. In 2018, Turner Construction was brought in to manage the massive transformation project that would see 250,000 square feet of existing space renovated and the addition of 100,000 square feet of new space. Today, the building has a completely different look and feel from its manufacturing past, but despite that, it still is a productive asset going forward. The people behind Church Brewworks were ahead of the curve with their conversion of a church into a brewery that took place way back in the 1990s. It started out as St. John the Baptist Roman Catholic Church, which it was for just under 100 years. Then in the early 1990s, it closed down. Only 3 years later, it would open as Church Brewworks. The exterior looks largely the same as it always has, but the inside receives significant changes. Where the altar once was, now sits all the brewing equipment, and church pews have been removed in favor of bars and tables. In the 20 years since it opened, a number of other cities have seen churches converted into breweries, including Steeplejack Brewing in Portland and the Ministry of Brewing in Baltimore. There's so many cool projects like these around the city that it's hard to narrow down a list of just a few of the best ones. So right now I'm going to do a rapid-fire honorable mention for some of the ones that I didn't get a chance to dive deep into, but are still cool in their own unique way. First off, the Union Trust Building. Not all adaptive reuse projects need to be a complete overhaul. In Pittsburgh, there are a lot of these types of projects that are totally transformational, but in some cases, the renovation is just about tweaking the use for more modern purposes and giving the old building a facelift. That was the case with the Union Trust Building downtown. It was spectacular when it opened up, and following a recent renovation, it still is that way today, despite its different uses than it had 100 years ago. The Wilson School Apartments may not have a dramatic visual transformation either, but two big things stand out to me about this project. First off, its location in McKees Rocks. McKees Rocks is one of the many mill towns that have struggled mightily over the last 50 years, so to see someone take a chance on a project in an area like this is definitely worthy of praise. It's also interesting the change in use from a school to apartments. Making a conversion like this is much easier said than done, as oftentimes schools aren't the best suited for a residential conversion. But in this case, they made it work. And finally, among the honorable mentions, Kingfly Distillery. Despite a humble start as a carriage house, the building now known as Kingfly Distillery in the Strip District has seen use as a little bit of everything over the last 100 years, including a horse stable, taxi depot, machine shop, furniture store, and now a distillery and event space. The most recent renovation makes a great effort to show off the history and craftsmanship of the old building through its exposed bricks and beams. Projects like this are important because they show that with a little bit of maintenance and a little bit of creativity, even something as humble as a horse stable can be preserved and utilized 100 years later. Now down to my two favorite and perhaps the two most transformational in the city. At number 2, we have the American Cork building, which, just like its name would suggest, it used to be a cork factory. But then in 2007, it was renovated into loft-style apartments. This was one of the earlier projects of this scale during the resurgence of the Strip District. The project took an underutilized industrial facility and converted it into almost 300 high-end apartments with soaring 14-foot ceilings, a pool, marinas, and an elevated walkway to cross from one side of the building to the other. At the time it started, much of the Strip District was either parking lots or warehouse space. But the scale and success of this project acted as a catalyst for the Strip District, which is now one of the most popular and thriving neighborhoods in the city. But the next one on the list really pushed it over the edge and solidified it as a thriving residential district. And that one would be the Strip District Terminal. It was probably one of the most distinctive buildings in the city even before its transformation. The Strip District Terminal is over a quarter-mile long and began its existence as a hub for wholesale produce. Its length gave it plenty of room for the constant loading and unloading that would go on around the clock with its more than 6 dozen loading bays. But the building started to become less and less important in the second half of the 1900s as transportation trends changed and supply chains were modernized. By 2010, it wasn't really clear what would happen to the terminal. But at the same time, the Strip District was also starting to take off as a popular new place to live. So in 2019, a major reimagining took place for the terminal, which shifted its use from a logistics hub to a mixed-use center for dining, entertainment, retail, and office space. Today, thanks to projects like American Cork and the Strip District Terminal, the Strip District is barely recognizable even from 10 to 15 years ago. And that's the list. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate all the supportive comments people have been leaving lately and ideas for future videos. In next week's video, the focus is headed back to Baltimore for a story about a bridge, but not the Key Bridge, a different one. So subscribe and hit the notification bell to be alerted when that one comes out.